Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been such an insightful and fruitful weekend, and we want to thank everyone for participating and showing up ready to learn. We've been so blessed and lucky to have Dr. Ken Stein with us and Lynn Stein with us this weekend. So we just want to give you one more big thank you, warm welcome to B'nai Yeshurun. At this point, we need no introduction here. I just want to share one quick story, which is as a freshman in Dr. Stein's Arab-Israeli conflict class, we all received a flash drive, and it was really a key to opening up an entire world. These were documents and sources that Dr. Stein has spent his career amassing and compiling, and it was just because for him, no one is more passionate about teaching students, teaching people how to go straight to the source. Once you have that information, the world opens up to you. So we're so excited to have Dr. Stein walk us through his sources, his website, and to give us one final in-depth session, which will go for about 40 minutes or so, followed by a Q&A. So thank you all for being here, and I turn us over to Dr. Ken Stein.
Good morning, those of you here in the room and those of you on Zoom. So it's a blended audience, and we'll have to make accommodations for both audiences to be sure that they're getting what I'd like to provide. The object of the morning is to familiarize you with perhaps some more information about the unfolding that's taking place in Israel. And the excuse me, the story of Hamas and how it got to be this heinous murder engaging a group of people, and how it evolved its ideology. And then I'd like to show you some of the sources that are accessible to you, not only about Hamas, but accessible about the history of modern Israel, its politics, its people, society, culture, literature, etc. Our website, israeled.org, and you can all see it here in the room in Shul. You can see it's just israeled.org. Pretty simple. Israel with the letter ed at the end of Israel, and then a .org. It's very simple. Israeled.org. Accessible on your handheld, accessible on your iPad, accessible on your Android, iPhone, laptop, portable, whatever. The purpose of the website was to accumulate information and source material were not gathered elsewhere in the world, to provide individuals an opportunity to access sources and documents and analyses that usually the general public would not have access to because they would not be familiar with. So where do I go to find this? How do I know that this think tank is reputable? How do I know that this author is writing from an analytical rather than from a political point of view or polemical point of view? And so what we tried to do is provide the material that, let's say, normally I would be providing in the classroom. What would I want my students to learn? And how would I want to create 3 segments in the learning process? How would I want them to understand the perspective? How would I want them to understand the context? And then how would I want them to understand the content? So perspective, context, and content. You can't just read the headline in the newspaper without knowing what is the context. And you can't do the context unless you have a perspective. I've always tried to answer questions on the contemporary based on what is the formative experience that was formidable, that came before, that enabled us to understand how we got to this moment. I always try and go back. That's why you noticed yesterday at synagogue in the afternoon session, and even on Friday night, I tried to avoid casting myself into the horizon of tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, because it's speculation. Now, it may make you feel good that you want to ask the question, so how's this going to end? And is Bibi Netanyahu going to resign? And will Hamas be totally destroyed? And will this ultimately reestablish Israel's deterrence? And, those are wonderful questions, but they cannot be answered at this moment, at this time, because of the nature of the ongoing event. So again, today, when those of you who are online or in this room, the urge will be to ask the question about tomorrow. I can tell you I can't answer the question. I just can't. And even though I say I can't, someone's still going to want to ask it anyway. It's like, okay, fine. One box of Raisinets and you end up eating two and you didn't tell your mother. At Emory, I taught for 44 years. Joshua was at Emory from, I think, 2010 to 14, maybe. But that's the latter part of my teaching career. I started in 77. And the first semester or quarter I started, this guy by the name of Sadat decided he wanted to go to Jerusalem. And 2 years later, the Shah fell. And this guy by the name of Khomeini came in and replaced secular Iranian nationalism with Islamic fundamentalism as a political platform for operations, for moving forward. Those were two very significant events in 79. And I had to figure out how I was going to remember what had happened because so much history was engendered. I started collecting documents. I started, putting them into my first my notebooks, and then ultimately into computers. And once we accumulated enough of these, we decided in 2015 to create a website. And in 2015, we created a website, and this was it. And we had 500 people that month, December 15. Last week, there were 70,000 people who went to the site. 70,000 users of this website. And they spent on an average of 45 seconds on the site. I mean, I can't tell you what they had for breakfast, but almost. And curiously, 15% of the users are Spanish readers.
Oh, wow.
Oh, if you read Spanish, or you got relatives who read Spanish, and they're interested in some of the things I'm going to show you. Now, why did I choose Spanish? because there was a demand. I didn't know that in December 2015. I had no clue. Now I'm going to dart around the website, but I want to get back to the very beginning, just a little bit more history, and then we'll go further. The assumption is that most individuals have some knowledge of either Jewish history or Israel, but they can't connect the dots, or they don't know what the dots are to connect that links the origins of the Jewish people with the land of Israel, with Zionism, with the period from 1948 to the present. I mean, if you're an archaeologist, you probably know a heck of a lot about ancient Israel. And if you're teaching in a day school and you're an archaeologist, you know a lot about ancient Israel. You may not know a lot about the 19th century. So the assumption is people jump into learning at different phases in their knowledge base. So you have to give them the entry points in order to do it, in order to make it convenient for them. Which means you have to put your information in all sorts of different places on the website that you wouldn't go to yourself, because that's not the way they're thinking and that's not what they're needing at a particular moment. Now, it's impossible, it's an absolute impossibility to anticipate what every individual wants when they comes to a website, particularly a learning website or an informational website. The center itself was established in 2008 as an outgrowth of the work I did at Emory. I hadn't retired yet from Emory, but I started collecting information as if I were going to have a website, or we were going to have a website. And I did that because a couple of day schools in the city of Atlanta wanted to be taught, how do you learn about modern Israel? I helped them with syllabi. We put syllabi together. You know, what books do you read? What questions do you ask? I mean, very basic questions on how do you teach Zionism? What are the foundational documents for the teaching of Zionism? Herzl's Jewish state? Okay, but what else? What else? Oh, maybe the Declaration of Independence of 1948. And then you kept on asking, what else? What else? What else? So I'm about now to show you how the website works and operates. This website has been in existence for 6 or 7 years. It is now undergoing reconfiguration, and there will be a new CIE website probably by January or February. But for the time being, this will have to suffice. Now, the drop-down menu across the top is pretty simple. It's who we are, it's how we're composed, it's our history, it's our newsletters, how do you stay in touch with us? It's like any other about section of any other website. You want to contact us, there it is. And I'll do some of the drop downs in each one of these in a moment, but let me go across the top first. Analyses. This is where we tackle contemporary issues. Now, I may write an opinion piece, which is called Ken's blog, but others may write items that we take from a think tank or take from another source that we think are really, really important. Really important. Now, let me show you just one. So my close friend, Mayor Litvak at Tel Aviv University, in January 1988, wrote an article on the Islamization of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the case of Hamas. It's such a good article and so unique, I said, I need to put it in the issues and analyses section. But in order to do that, I had to ask Meir for permission to reprint it. because it normally appeared in a journal and the journal has copyright. So I had to get permission from the author to do that. Mayor said, of course. So if you were to read this and you want to go deep, into the topic, this is the best article on the origins of the Islamization of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Now, let me see if I can get out of this without all right. So what did I do when some of you were asking at home, what where did I go? Oh, Joshua, what did I do? Here?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I did was I was in analyses. I went to issues and analyses. And then from that, I got Litvak's article. Now, I thought it's so important that not only did I put it there, but as I scroll down on the homepage under latest content, if you just go down the homepage, and if you have your handheld and you go down the homepage, you can scroll down and you can get to Litvak's article. Now, you may not want to go to issues and analyses, so I had to choose to put it in another place that it would be accessible to the general public, and they might want to read it. So I had to put it on the homepage. So if you scroll down slowly, you'd look at it and go, wow, this is interesting. January 88. Now, I didn't write an introduction as saying this is the best thing since sliced bread. But just curiously, the last webinar we did, that's Meir Litvak. And he was on our webinar and he talked about his article. But that's just purely coincidental, and it has nothing to do with trying to
Click on the top. Forward. Yeah. Put the mouse down and click on center first.
Got it? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I'm dyslexic. So the analyses enable you to go into contemporary issues that relate to just about any topic. The the resources, Center for Israel Education Resources, is a lot more complex, and I'll go through some of these in a moment. And some of them are really, truly top of the line. Education, if you're a teacher, things that you want to buy, the Spanish section. And for this particular event, this is the second time we've done this. On our homepage, we created a special button for the Israel-Hamas war. So you just go to the CIE website, click on to the Israel-Hamas war, and now you have a collection and selection of a whole bunch of things that you can go dive into. If you want to dive into the webinar we did last week, it is a description of what we talked about. If you want a curated reading list, you're a student and you're an interested scholar at home, and you got some free time, and you want to take a look at some of the best articles written from 87 to 2023. What we did was we collected these articles, all online accessible, and you can just go to them. And most of them, as far as we know, are analytical, but not polemical. Now, if you're writing a paper at the university on Hamas and Hamas Israel, you don't need to go anyplace else. We did all the work for you. Right? I mean, if you really want to, drown in a topic, this is where you go drown. Back to the homepage. CIA resources, right? Education store, and the button. Now, every Wednesday at noon Eastern Daylight Time, we are going to have a webinar. This coming Wednesday, there'll be a webinar. Just like we've had the previous 2 Wednesdays. And if you can't make it to the webinar, make it to the website within 2 days, and there it is archived. And if you're on your Stairmaster or you're taking a walk, just plug it in, put in your earbuds, and off you go. And you may learn more than you ever anticipated. And it's 45 or 50 minutes because I don't know how to shut up. So I can assure you it's going to be a 45-minute exercise. I can tell you that right off the bat. Now we get to some really interesting aspects of the war that's ongoing. So this is the reading list up to August 2023, and this is the reading list just the last 15 days. And every 15 days, we will have an updated list. Supposing you would like to subscribe to this, the top of the homepage is your subscribe button. You can subscribe to a slew of items, and you can subscribe to Israel-Hamas war. And every time we add something new, it pops into your inbox. Now we publish other things too, and I'll get that in a moment. But right now, I think what's pretty much on your mind is the Israel-Hamas war. And we put this button up on Tuesday of last week. That's how recent it is. And already we have 65 people subscribed to it, without any advertising. People have a way of finding things that is quite remarkable. That's the first webinar. Well, that's actually the second webinar we did. You want to peruse the maps of Gaza and take a look at what this story is about. This is the area that Israel asked people to remove themselves from, to move south. Then you have the map of Israel in the Middle East. It shows you lengths, distances, and width. And for those 9 and 10 and 11-year-olds, it teaches them that Iran is not on Israel's border. That's not a joke, by the way. The reality is many people don't know the geography of the Middle East. These are the major points of Hamas's infiltration on October 7th. We're not certain that they actually got to Ashkelon, but we put it there anyway. Another map of the Gaza area with all sorts of information about who settled it and who was there and when. And then this is your map of Gaza and the blue areas where the Israelis had their settlements before they withdrew from Gaza. And the map is so labeled. And we'll continue to add, once we know how this unfolding is going to occur in Gaza with the Israeli military, we'll be adding maps to it as well. So if you're a teacher and you need stuff to teach the kids, or you're a rabbi and you want to pass something out for an adult education session, or you're just curious, the maps, we understand, we realize, are so very, very relevant and so terribly important. So here's a timeline we created. I'm not going to drop down into it, but it took us about 2.5 weeks to create a timeline from 1988, when Hamas's charter was created, and down to the present. Now, the interesting part about this, there's a good introduction, a short introduction, and then we start enumerating what happened. And it's just a timeline. And you can see Israeli prime ministers and how they reacted. It's not meant to be political or polemical. It's just to tell you the story. It's to make you smart. That's it. This whole objective of this website is to make people smarter. Now, for those who are really crazed individuals, this is a collection that I started making about 30 years ago on the important quotations from Hamas's beliefs, ideology, their attitudes, etc., with a short introduction. And then you can go to the Hamas charter. You can read snippets of what their leaders said about Israel, about Jews, about Zionism, about the need to destroy the state of Israel, about the fact that the PLO could not be recognized because it had embraced Israel, and no Palestinian secular group can embrace Israel because it gives Israel and Jews legitimacy to have a state. I mean, this is the core essence of Hamas. Like, Israel does not belong there. Israel has to go away. Jews have got to go away. Right? Now, let's be honest. How many of us in the United States, let alone the Jewish community, knew that this was a fundamental belief of people who lived adjacent to the Gaza Strip? Now, maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20, 1 out of 50 people. But whatever it was, whatever the number was, the lesson learned is we have to learn what other people say about us and don't ignore it simply because it's in a foreign language, or simply because they may say they want to destroy us, and our political viewpoint may be, oh, no, I need to have a two-state solution. You can't let what you want deny the reality of what actually exists.
Right.
No matter how dear that conclusion is to you. Because if we don't face reality, this will happen again. That's not the only reason why October 7th happened. Don't mistake me here. It wasn't just because people weren't reading the Arabic and internalizing it, and the Israeli intelligence weren't doing something about it. I mean, there must be a dozen reasons why this happened on October 7th, and this is one of them. And I spoke in synagogue about mindsets. I spoke in synagogue about people getting locked into a mindset and they can't get out of it. Thought maybe the Gaza Strip was peaceful, or maybe if we let some Gazans into the state of Israel and worked and they would put money in their pocket, they would be less angry at Israel. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but for those of you who may have had an opinion, you probably thought that. So you have to then ask the question, can you purchase someone's ideological commitment? What's the price? Feeding your family? Or they still go to bed at night wanting to see you disappear? Now, that's what happens when you delve deeply into sources. When you delve deeply into sources, it's not the superficial interpretation of some historian who's interpreting it for you, or it's a second or third party who's overlaying their own political feelings and hopes and aspirations. I'm asking people to peel back that onion. You know, get yourself down to that core, right? We have a method of cooking at home. I sous chef. I clean up. She's a great cook. She puts the items on the counter. She said, I need green squash, yellow squash, peel the carrots, cut them on an angle, I need 2 onions, soup size. At least 3 or 4 times a week, I'm cutting up an onion. And I'm reminded that I got to get to the core. Now, sometimes I cry because they're sweet onions. But the point is, we all have got to get to the onion and get inside it. And you can't allow just the rabbi to do it. You can't allow just the editor of the Jewish newspaper to do it. You can't allow just the head of federation to do it. You can't allow just a teacher at a school or AJC or ADL or whatever organization you gladly and joyously affiliate with, and that does wonderful things. Don't assume the institution is going to do your learning. And not only that, you then have to pass it on to the next generation. You have to take your 15-year-old or your 25-year-old son or daughter or 38-year-old kid and say, you have to read this. You have to see what they mean. What does it say? Here I'm going on thin ice, Hal and Joshua. What does it say in the second paragraph of the Shema? Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children when thou walkest by the way. I don't remember the. It's not just tefillin. It's our story. It's our story. And if we're going to survive, we got to be smart. Know the story. So this is a lifetime of aggregation of information. It took me about 3.5 weeks to pull it together and then send it to some of my colleagues at the Center for Israel Education to try and proofread it. And we managed really well to do it. So let's see what else we have in store for y'all. This is the first webinar we did. These are Hamas's political thought and stances in light of the Arab uprising. A very important Hamas leader in 2012 wrote a very detailed history of what Hamas stands for. It came after the 1988 charter, and it is crystal clear about what Hamas stands for. You can't use the word militant to describe these people after you read this. But I would suspect that some people who are writing materials for newspapers are so fossilized and their feet are in such cement in using terminology, they can't get away from it. They have no wiggle room. Because if what you're essentially saying is your belief over the long time that this is a legitimate political entity was proven hollow, false, and totally wrong on October 7th. It's like telling someone the sun doesn't rise in the east, it rises in the west. And you have to accept that as a reality. And think about how hard that would be for you. So mindsets require constant looking, constant refreshing. You know, we refresh all the time on the computer. Refresh. I'm not saying you have to do it 24/7. I'm not saying you're going to turn into a PhD writing some masterpiece at Harvard University on, you know, Hamas's attitude toward Jews. There have been plenty of them that have been written anyway. Don't worry about it. Just asking you to stay current, to stay smart. Because when you are, it has an impact upon your emotions when you see things happening that really hurt. what happens is you bury yourself in the origins of why they hurt you. And your rationality begins to take over, but not excusing them, but understanding them. And I think understanding your adversary is absolutely critical. I think you have to understand your friends too. You're writing a contract for buying a piece of real estate. You're going to have to understand, what does she get? What do I get? What are the terms? How much money is being put down over what period of time? What kind of clauses are in it? You're always doing that in a negotiation. You have to do it in understanding history as well. And I would submit that any person in North America who cares about Israel should be knowing a little bit about all of this nonsense that's that's taking place now. Wait a minute. You're talking about Hamas, and you're talking about the last 10 days and maybe the last 25 years. No, I never took a course on modern Israel. I barely know how to spell Herzl and realize it's not the spelling of a rental car agency. Don't worry, I got that from students who wrote midterms and finals. No. Sorry, Alex. So what I did over a period of time with the help of staff, and it's not yet complete, I decided it was a reasonably good idea to write a short history of the Jewish people to 1897 and write one from 1898 to 1948. And just before the war started, I finished 49 to 79. And that'll probably go up in about a week. It's short. Maybe each one of them is 3,000 to 5,000 words. I think the first one is maybe 2,000. This one may be 4,000. And what I did was I also had them translated into Spanish, Hebrew, and Portuguese. And we're now working on Polish because I realize that people abroad also have access to the same information. So, for example, let me go back for a moment. So this is the first era. And you click onto era 1. Now you're going to ask me how to get to era 1. Under CIE resources, just drop down to eras. Now think about it. You have the analyses, you have the CIE resources, drop down to era, and you get maybe it'll take you 15 to 18 minutes to read each one of them. Right? They're not voice yet, but they will be voice as well. So they'll be, Stairmaster material. So you're at the era. So I said, how best to understand the era and what were the most important events that occurred in the era up to 1897? And so this is the era, and you can read it. And as you go through it, what I did was I hyperlinked it to very important concepts. So this is hyperlinked to the biblical covenants. And these are the biblical covenants all in one place that God made and promised to the Jewish people. They're all right here. Anyone who wants to have a discussion of each one of these, b'te'avon, go for it. Right? There's a very short introduction, but if you really want to go into it and really think about what was in the five books of Moses, what the covenants were, there it is. So if you read further, from its inception, Jewish identity was wrapped around the mutual commitments between God and the people. Goes on and on and on. And literally, I get down to learning Torah, obeying its prescriptions, and staying attached to life cycle events provided internal communal cement. Through liturgical references to Zion and Jerusalem, the Jewish people sustain their connection to the ancestral land. What are you talking about, Stein? Here are the liturgical references. As many as I could collect. And I had two rabbis help me. Sampling of prayers and blessing that make reference to Zion. Jewish communal life as a minority. Keeps on going down, seeking Zionism, Alkali, Galisher, Jewish sociology, first Zionists in 1878. The Dreyfus Affair, what Palestine looked like, and all of a sudden, you're at 1897, 1898. Did I do something wrong? Anyway. Next era. Here you go. Herzl, all the way down to building the state. And every time you go through it, you'll be able to hit a hyperlink. So this was 1947. The head of the Arab League said, we don't want to compromise with the Zionists. You know, Abba Eban, David Hurwitz, and one other fellow went to see him in September 47. And he said, they said to him, we still can have a two-state solution. And the Arab League said, no, thank you. Well, this is the dialogue between the Zionists and that Arab League representative about saying, no, thank you. We don't want you. Go away. Only war will do. Mm-hmm. Now, I think if reading these histories can help create the context, I think it's well worthwhile. And the hyperlinks, I think, are I think they're pretty good. I don't know anyone else in the world that's actually decided that they wanted to provide an individual with an opportunity to learn by themselves and also go deeper into the sources and let the sources direct you as to what happened. And it's most important for you to understand the period of 45 to 49, because that's the period right after World War II. That's the period in which maybe 150,000 Jews will come as displaced persons to Israel, to Palestine. It's the period of time in which the Arab population of Palestine is most dysfunctional and in which the Palestinian population will leave and a Jewish population from Arab states will come into the state. All right, I'm going to stop here and ask for either questions online or for questions here in the audience. I'm sorry. A question? Yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. Have you had either Muslim students or Muslims who've connected with you on site? What was their reaction to all
They have no problem. I have never had a problem with anyone about the objectivity of the material. I've had.
But do they? All right. That's okay. They didn't object to the objectivity. Did they agree with it? I mean, did
I
they?
don't care if they agree with it.
No, but I'm just,
I'm not
what
taking
is their
public
reaction?
opinion
I
polls.
understand. But what I want to know is, what was their
I
reaction to
don't-
being told the truth? Because they may not have
No.
known this.
Listen, everyone can determine what the truth is by what they decide the truth is. I'm not the umpire. I can't play umpire. I can only be provider.
They didn't put bombs around your office, in other words.
I have never had an argument in 40 years in my Arab-Israeli conflict class among students, whether they went to a day school or they're the granddaughters of the PLO executive committee. Because what the key is, you have to leave your ideology at the door. And that's what this is about. This is about learning. It's not about fueling you with, going to kill people. Sir.
How do you reconcile with, like, I hear you when you say believe them when they say something. Believe me, I do. I know what from C to C means. But every Israeli,
Can you use this? Because there are people online who can't. Just sit right here. I won't give you the Z. You have 50
I trust you. How do you reconcile
Question really short, right?
with the fact that, again, I agree with you about believing people what they tell you. But every Israeli prime minister from Ben Gurion, even Eric Sharon, said we have to have a two-state solution or we can't govern the Palestinians. And even Eric Sharon criticized Netanyahu for not having the guts to take. That's the question. How do you reconcile that statement where Palestinians are saying death to the Jews, but Israeli leadership themselves are saying we got to get the shot?
You're asking me to speak for 13 Israeli prime ministers. And then I get a chance to get out of town. Let me try and answer it this way. Making domestic or foreign policy is always a series of choices. And it's not necessarily the best choice that you make at any particular moment. And historical events around the time that you make the choice or what's going on affects how you choose. So during the Cold War, up through Begin, Shamir, and Peres to the end of the 80s, there was an overarching issue for Israel about what role would the Soviet Union play and what kind of chances could Israel take vis-a-vis its neighbors. Now notice, Ben-Gurion never said, I'm interested in a two-state solution. He said, everyone who lives here should have equal rights. But he didn't talk about two states, and Eshkol didn't talk about two states. And Golda even asked, who are the Palestinians? And Rabin's first term, and certainly Begin's term, and Shamir's term, they never talked about a two-state solution. That's something that's mid-late 1980s forward. Israel has already passed its 40th anniversary. It was only in the late 80s that there began to be discussion with Rabin and then Peres and then Sharon and then Olmert and even Bibi. Bibi gave a speech in July of 2009 at June 2009 at Bar Ilan University when he said, I'm in favor of a demilitarized Palestinian state alongside us in a limited portion of the territories, as long as we control the security and the access in the Jordan River. And then domestic politics influenced how the policy toward a way of resolving Palestinian self-government was postponed. So I can't, forgive me, I can't reconcile it. I can only tell you how it evolved. But this notion of two states for two people, as articulated by Israelis proposed, or Zionists proposed it in 47 and 49. Partition resolution. And then it wasn't brought up again until the late 80s. And that in part because the Palestinians themselves weren't yet ready to accept a Jewish state on a portion of the land west of the Jordan River. We can put burden of responsibility on Israeli leaders and Israeli decision makers, but an intervening variable is what's happening in the international community, what's happening in the Arab world, and what's happening within Israeli politics. But you also you need two people to have a waltz. I mean, you can shadow waltz with, someone who's not there. Now, let me, I don't think I've ever said this. Supposing a Palestinian leader 5 years ago published a manifesto that said, if Israel withdraws from 95% of the territories, we'll recognize Israel's right to exist as a nation state of the Jewish people. You'll have to allow us to bring in 100,000 Palestinian refugees, and we'll decide who that is. And we'll have this experiment go for 3 years. And the international community will provide X number of dollars every year to support this entity. But you have to commit yourself to withdrawal from 95% of the land. I don't care what you do, your settlements. But we're prepared to sign a final agreement with you. Now, what would the Israeli body politic have done about that? Well, right.
Hell no.
Right. You don't know until you see it. We didn't know on October 6th what we saw on October 7th. We didn't know it until we saw it. So part of our dilemma in resolving an issue of two people who want some control over the same territory, you have to have it takes two. I'm not saying you forget it, but I'm not saying you can just instantaneously create two states tomorrow, not after what happened on October 7th. I spent yesterday in shul talking about what are the ingredients necessary to have accommodations between sides. You need to have leaders. You need to have who can see over the horizon. They have to be able to bring their people along. You have to have trust between the sides. You can't have violence going on at the same time. You have to have a trusted mediator who can hold your hand and provide incentives. That's all necessary. In all due respect to Tom Friedman, you can scream all you want about the two-state solution as a condition for Israel going into Gaza and wiping out Hamas. You can't condition it on war going into peace. Not after what happened, not after 1,300, 1,400 people were butchered. I said it yesterday. You can't do this at the New York Times editorial offices in New York City. It's well-meaning, and it may sit well with us because we want to see a resolution to an issue that's been haunting many of us for many years. But you can't lay down and let a truck run over you to make it happen. And you have to resist yourself from saying, too many Israeli leaders and too much Israeli politics have kept it from happening, and too many settlements. Anyone who tells me it's the settlements, I can tell you as of October 7th, it ain't the settlements.
It's the mindset.
I hate
Yes.
And if you don't believe me, take a look at the videos. Are the settlements an impediment? Maybe. But it's deeper than that.
It's hatred.
It has to do with whether people want to live with one another or they want to shoot one another.
Absolutely.
So do me a favor. Whatever great idea you had about embracing the other and wanting a resolution to the conflict, please put it on your pantry shelf for the time being.
Gonna happen.
Just put it on the pantry shelf. You can't say never in history. It may still unfold. But right now, there's a more important issue at hand. The survival of the Jewish state. A sovereign Jewish state. In areas of the Middle East that people want to see the state disappear. I am not exaggerating. Read what they say. Look at what they do. And the they is not every Arab and the they is not every Palestinian. So we have to be careful about putting everyone in the same bucket. But if we're not for ourselves, who are we? And if not now, when? Someone important, Joshua, probably said that.
Hillel. Hillel.
Right? I mean, all right. Yes, go.
When Israel left Sinai and Egypt took Sinai back, the peninsula, Gaza didn't go back under Egyptian control.
You're talking about when the negotiations between
Camp
Egypt and
David,
Israel. Right.
Et cetera.
Keep going. Great.
Could that have happened? Should that have happened?
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps a redundant question, what difference would it have made?
Was it?
What difference would it have made?
What? Well,
What would it have?
first of
what would it
all,
have been?
Egypt didn't want it back. And they didn't want it back. Sadat, no, he didn't want it back. He didn't want to, like Sisi now, he's very concerned about Palestinian refugees leaving Gaza and permanently taking up residence in Egypt for three reasons. One, he doesn't want to have it on his shoulders that Palestinians left like they left in 47 or 48 or 67 or whatever. And the Israelis are taking more control of the area of what was Palestine. He has public opinion that won't permit it, even if he wanted to do it himself, and he probably doesn't. His own politics. He can't absorb Gaza, because why would you want to absorb a malady into your political system?
My question is, I understand, but also, should that have happened in 70?
I can't do should have and would have. I can't go there because I can't answer the question. We can go out and have a beer until the Browns lose, but lose hard.
True.
What each neighbor of Israel has got to concern himself now is, how will my population react to all this? And how do I keep up a relationship with Israel and with the United States, but also let off the steam that is really hot? Gaza is a geographic issue that requires savvy, smart political engineering, where the Palestinians will ultimately have control over it and their future, or a portion of their future, and their economic well-being can be, or if for some reason or some probable ways enhanced, right? If we were sitting here in a year from now and we were to speculate what it would look like, I can't. I know that the two populations need to separate from themselves because they don't like each other. But they may have to be dependent upon one another for either security and or economic well-being. That's way over the horizon. I can't tell you how many think tank pieces have been written on what would a two-state solution look like. Hundreds. In every capital of the world. I mean, I want to, one more question. Let me get back because I only have another 15 minutes and I'd like to know if there are any questions online. So I'm not just paying lip service. What participants? Nothing? Huh?
We're doing this here for a moment. Make the Zoom screen.
Anyone? Yeah, I mean, ask it. Do I have to do something else or just ask? What am I asking?
Just unmute it there.
This?
Yeah, don't take any time to.
Is that what I hit?
You don't have to, they'll unmute themselves if they have a question.
If you have a question, unmute yourself. If you don't have a question, keep going. You're okay? All you nice folks online? Right? Cool. All right.
Question over here.
Engaging an informative session to let us to think and rethink. My question is, whatever Hamas is, their goals, their strategies, their dreams, their hopes, can they say that they are based on any of the Quran or any of their holy texts?
Well, I mean, read their charter. It's based on, their quotations from the Quran in it that don't exactly embrace Jews. And I'm being very polite. I mean, this is a question which has not yet been asked, and it's been troubling me. And I asked last night, it was at dinner with Alex, Lynn, and Joshua. And I asked Joshua the question, and it still troubles me. Can people who grow up and live in secular liberal societies and understand the value of civility and understand the value of the goal of gender and race and religious equality? People who live under the umbrella of Western liberal secular democracies. Do people who have that as their base, do they have the capacity to understand that individuals who are driven by religious theology, even extreme religious theology, act on their religious theology and may live in Western liberal democracies, but the motivation, their catalyst for action is their religious fundamental outlook? Can we, do we have the capacity to internalize, to shut off our values for a moment and understand that those who are so motivated will perform acts that are so egregious that even if they're living in Western liberal democracies, the core of their essence, what catalyzes their action, is their theological or ideological commitment. Now, I don't have an answer to that question.
I think Thomas Friedman has answered your question, and the answer is no.
I think
Well,
some can.
Well,
Some can't.
some can, some can't. but maybe the people who weren't paying attention or, and I don't mean the Israelis who were on station on October 5th. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the European Union. I'm talking about individuals who kept on saying, if you reach for a two-state solution, someone will accept it. And you don't have to pay any attention to these folks. When someone says that Hamas is a legitimate political actor and does not need to drop its terrorism before we accept it as a legitimate political actor, what does that say about that individual? It says that that individual is willing to let someone else's criteria of what is admissible as behavior need no longer be considered in order to admit them into the circle of people who are talking about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict tomorrow. That's what Carter said in 2015. Now, most people know I have a history with Carter. I helped him reestablish the Carter Center after he left the White House, that I spent a lot of time and effort in, along with, 3 or 4 other people, in making it happen. He got a podium for speaking up and speaking out. He did a really fine job. He did wondrous things. He did great things with healthcare and Habitat for the Humanity. But he also went out and embraced individuals who were, questionable in terms of their human rights record, for a guy who based a lot of his foreign policy on human rights. And then he slowly embraced Hamas. To the point where a Hamas leader in 2015 said, Mr. President, you have no idea how much it means to us that you have accepted our legitimacy. Now, how many others in the world did the same thing? The president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, did. We know that. He spoke up about, getting rid of Israel, getting rid of the Jews. He didn't hide his views about it. And other people in the international community did the same thing. And even those within the Arab world or the Muslim world embraced Hamas and said, we can deal with Hamas, but we'll also deal with the PA. If you temporize, you say to someone, you're acceptable, and we'll forget the bad stuff you do until the bad stuff becomes so egregious, it becomes nauseating. I have no idea where that editorial came from. So when you look at the resources, we translated materials into Italian, haven't done a lot, done some into Hebrew. And I want to show one particular item in Hebrew. We have the eras in Hebrew if you're a Hebrew speaker and you want to read some materials, with Balfour Declaration and a couple of other things. And I put together a map of Israel's establishment or creation or evolution from 1882 to 1947. Now, this is the Hebrew version. I'll get to the English version in a moment. But what I wanted to point out to you is that in 1947, when partition was suggested, the black dots were where Jews had purchased land previously up until the partition plan. So it wasn't exactly just a gift that someone received. They built Dagania, they built Hadera, they built Cholon, they built, Ashkelon. All of these were built prior to the Shoah. I want to go back and to my maps. I want to show you the maps, and I'll show you this item in English. This is the item in English, forming a nucleus for a Jewish state. Now, why is it relevant? Because what you can do here, you can go to the PDF. I did this a couple of years ago with actually my nephew, who's turned out to be one of the brightest young scholars in the States in terms of Middle Eastern learning. I'm just phenomenally proud of what he's done. Anyway, what we did was we put together a whole series of learning units that if you want to learn about how the state evolved slowly from this date to this date, and remember, it's under maps, it's real easily accessible, it's under maps, and you can go into any one of these and you will get a detailed description of what this was about in this year and how much land was purchased by what date. And then you can continue on and you can see how land was continued to be purchased and how the nucleus for the state evolved. And you keep on scrolling down. Each one of these is a separate map until you get to here. The decision to partition Palestine into two states was a decision that was in great measure created by Zionists who linked people to the land because they bought the land and they immigrated the people. No one should have any doubt about the legitimacy and the justification of the UN decision in 1947. This was not a gift to the Jewish people because 6 million people died. Indeed, the Holocaust played a critical role in people's positive outlook to the necessity for the Jews to have a state. I have no doubt about it. I spent half of my life sitting in Keren Kayemet Jewish National Fund archives reading the documents that engendered these maps. There's no reason for me to go to my grave and have it in my computer. It's mandatory for people to see, to read, to learn, to understand, and pass it on to the next generation. Yes, sir.
Looking at the map, the question that occurs to me is why was land not bought in what is now the West Bank or Judea and Samaria?
Question, and what do you think the answer is?
That's why I'm asking.
What do you think the answer is? You're a smart man. What do you do for a living?
Real estate.
Well, with all due respect, sir, you are about to forfeit half of your wealth for the coming year if you do not answer this correctly.
They wouldn't sell it?
No, they wouldn't buy it.
Why did they buy land where you see it in the green area and not in the red area?
Close to the sea.
Hush. Sir.
So it's close to the sea and it's contiguous.
And the land is more like Nebraska and Iowa than it is by the Dead Sea.
Fair enough.
Doesn't it matter the kind of land that you purchase? And that's the hill regions. And the coastal plain had a greater possibility for agricultural development. And particularly here, the Jezreel Valley had been the breadbox for many empires. So that's where the colonization, the settlements took place. And that's where the land purchases took place.
I know the Arabah is a dry desert, but are none of the hill country worthy?
So you have not forfeited all of your wealth. I know you had help from the audience, but
I need all the help I could get.
No, I'm sure you're doing pretty well. But you understand? The idea also was that the Central Range was where the Arab population was most heavily concentrated. So why would you buy land around where the heavily populated concentration was amongst people that might not particularly appreciate you being there at that particular time?
I distinctly remember some Israeli leader making the statement that if there had only been more Aliyah earlier, that might have been possible. Maybe that's what he meant.
You still had to have money. You know, it was really a small number of Jews who made this thing unfold when you think about it.
Yeah.
And the only reason they were successful is that because the Arabs were just more disorganized and less committed and politically dysfunctional. I mean, just super dysfunctional. And that's a major reason why Israel came into being. It's not just the things that you do when you go into a conflict. You have to, what are the elements, what are the qualities of your adversary, and how will they be used against you? And in this particular case, it was not very successful.
Just want to give us a 2-3 minute warning.
Is this where the Browns lose the game? That 8-minute warning?
I haven't been very gracious toward the hometown teams.
They don't deserve it. They gave you plenty of opportunity not to.
The strangers should not be casting stones.
Thank you. That's very
Hand
interesting.
over here.
Yeah.
That was a little bit of a difficult question, but as I listen to your point here about Western liberalism, are we sure that underneath that isn't underlying Christian beliefs, though not being presented orthodox, that actually represent, you know, the expectation, for example, that maybe the Messiah is not going to come unless the Jews are, or that underneath that is some
Well,
religious.
you know, That's a
No,
question, that's a question for theology.
Well, it's a question of the real, like Jimmy Carter. You know, it's like underneath that, is there some
I
basis of Christian belief?
I can't get into people's head and heart.
Yeah.
I'm
That's a question we all have to ask.
yeah,
us
okay,
About that with regard to the.
Okay. Okay. Well accepted. Absolutely well accepted. Last one.
Difference between Gaza and the West Bank is simply size, location, density, availability of economic opportunities.
Yeah. A lot of differences, but the political identity or similarity or absolute parallel is the reality that, you know, that they want a place of their own.
It's to be ours.
Israel's at 75. It's quite a remarkable. It still has some unfinished business.
On the West Bank, okay, because they control Bethlehem and Nazareth and everything else, obviously they're benefiting from the tourists coming in. Jews, non-Jews, people go there. Okay, obviously Gaza doesn't have that attraction. But do the people in Gaza not see the advantages of?
What's the question?
The people in Gaza not see the economic advantage of being aligned?
I can't speak for 2 million people in Gaza. I wouldn't even begin to think. I think after what happened in the last 2 weeks, I think whatever survey research we have is probably no longer valid. Good weekend, my friend. Thank you for.
I'm going to give one final thank you to Dr. Stein, to Lynn for joining us. And just reminding us how crucially important it is for us to continue to learn, to look at history when the future and the present is uncertain and we need places to turn to. So thank you so much again for